It's quite funny because when I was at the end of my Wall Street career, I was started to have all of these dreams about drum circles and shamanism and spiritual things and going to the Amazon and all that. And when I left Wall Street, I started having all these Wall Street dreams. I would be, practicing spirituality, studying yoga and stuff like that. And I go to bed at night and I would dream of the stock market. And I came to this realization that both of these parts are parts of me. And to the degree that I kind of repress one of them, it's an unexpressed potential inside of myself.
There's a lot of mystics on the internet. Shout out and much love, you crazy fools, that could use dusting off a textbook or two, warmly, without judgment. And secondarily, there are certainly a lot of scholars in academia who would be well served by eating a mushroom. So I'm trying to bridge those two worlds. I'm Bob Peck, and this is Karmic Relief.
My background is in documentary film and comparative religion. I wrote a book called Original Sin is a Lie: How Spirituality Defies Dogma and Reveals Our True Self.
It's an interview show where I talk to spiritual teachers, activists, scholars, people that live within these traditions and also appreciate the overlap. What happens when you start to get activated internally, that makes you activated in a compassionate way in the world. I'm thrilled to be talking to fantastic, inspiring human beings. I have to do much less work, which is nice because I'm just asking them questions about their story. It's a life hack.
Hi.
I hope you'll enjoy these explorations, these really excavations. In the ones I've filmed so far, they've all been really beautiful and deep and lighthearted. So please enjoy Karmic Relief. I'm Bob Peck. I wrote Original Sin is a Lie, and now I'm asking a bunch of questions to intelligent, compassionate humans.
Jason Pickard is an exception to the rule. He comes from Wall Street trading. Jason was one of the top traders in his field on the planet. And yet he was miserable. And then he got in shape. Rich and fit, he was never in a lesser mental place in his life. He realized that he needed spiritual guidance and soulful excavation. Jason has studied the world mystics extensively and learned from some of the best teachers in this space. He's also extremely generous with his new service offerings. Glad to call him a friend. And shout out to Chase and Mimi from The Medicine for the initial intro. Hope you enjoy this one.
You give me hope, brother, because there's so
I'm very optimistic.
greed.
I'm very optimistic in the world, about the world right now. I know it can be difficult to think that way, but I think simply like one of the most important things about being spiritual, if I might say humbly, is to be optimistic.
Mm-hmm.
Is to hold an optimistic viewpoint. So I want to start with that I am optimistic about the world, and I as difficult as it may seem, and when you look around and see some of the things that are going on, I think we're living at a very good time to see a very bright future in our lifetime. I firmly believe that.
That's beautiful. I think the best takes lately have been this is very much a catalyst. This is very much hey, you can't just shove it away. You have to integrate it. You can't just pretend it's not there, right? You have to really dig down and dig deep. And it's like, until we do that, it's going to get louder. So this is the louderness moment of the unintegration. It's just going to keep getting noisy until we can incorporate that into the quiet. Something like that. You give me hope just as a person, but also your story gives me hope, because I think in late stage capitalism, there is a decent amount of greed that is pervasive in the mindset of people that have a decent amount of power, have a decent amount of influence in the way that this world works. And not to be too, let's definitely go there around the value that you can provide when you do obtain, higher levels of socioeconomic status. Like, I would like to do that myself. It's a way of serving when you you can serve more people. You can serve better, right? When you get to a certain level. But you come from finance, and you left finance. I mean, that's the nutshell TLDR, is you were just doing really well, and now you are helping to usher in a different paradigm.
Yeah, I think I want to speak on my story, to give context, but I think sometimes we make a mistake that spirituality and money shouldn't go together. But if we're really honest about the great world religions, they essentially came from people that had lots of resources. There's a lot of research that I've read about the idea that Jesus had a lot of resources, that the Magi came to visit him at birth and gave him all sorts of frankincense and myrrh and gold and gifts that were worth, possibly millions of dollars in today's value. Moses lived with the Pharaoh of Egypt. Buddha was a prince. Arjuna was a prince. Muhammad married a very wealthy businesswoman. So I think somewhere along the line, there's this distortion that was created that the money should only go to the institutions that have become quite wealthy in themselves. The institutions of religions are some of the wealthiest organizations on the planet.
For better or worse.
Yeah, but along the way, we've sort of bifurcated that means that in order for us to be spiritual, in order for us to live a path of God, that we need to give our money away. But what I'm trying to usher in is an awareness of bringing them both together. And this happened to me in my own path. This is what I discovered in my own life, that one without the other is kind of empty. So, in my own story, I had a beautiful upbringing. I had a really wonderful mom and dad, and my dad was a Wall Street guy, very smart, very hardworking, very disciplined, and at the same time, a really great family man. My mom was mostly a stay-at-home mom, but she also worked in kind of the athletic field. She was a personal trainer at times and did other various things, but very involved in my brother and my life. I grew up in a Jewish household, but along the way, I felt very disconnected. I felt like, in a lot of ways, I felt like I was watching my own life. I didn't really feel embodied and connected to myself. And I didn't feel a deep connection to any sort of faith at the time. This kind of went on to when I went to college, at the kind of normal age, and went to University of Virginia. And while I was there, I did pretty well, but really kind of got into this mindset that I had to be the biggest partier and kind of do the most extreme things in order to gain the attention of people, all coming from a sense of sort of my own lack of self-confidence. And I went on to Wall Street right out of college, around 22 years of age, and I went into a really interesting field called weather trading that we could talk about if that's of interest to you. And that's the same path that I stayed in until I retired at 39 in 2019. But along that way, while I started to do very well financially and very well professionally, by the age of 26, I was the youngest partner ever at the time at this very esteemed hedge fund called Tudor Investment, run by Paul Tudor Jones, who's an amazing human being, an amazing financial genius, and also a great philanthropist and a great, all-around human. And I was ranked one of the top 30 traders under 30 in the world. I had already made millions and millions of dollars. I was at the top of my field. But at the same time, I was 330 pounds. I was obese. I was sick. I was depressed, and I felt very disconnected from life itself. And that was a really big turning point for me. And at that time, out of just straight fear of ill health and death, really, I started to exercise, and I exercised like a fiend for 2 years with like the same intensity that I brought to Wall Street, and lost 170 pounds. And there I was at 160 pounds now, with the body that I thought I wanted, with the bank account that I thought I wanted, with the job that I thought I wanted, but I still felt disconnected. And I felt like something was lacking. On the inside, I didn't really feel much different. On the outside, things were good. On the inside, things were the same. And that's when I kind of realized that this was an inside job, that this thing I was looking for had to come from the inside out. And that started me on my spiritual path around, 15, 16, 17 years ago when I was around 27 years of age. And so, ultimately my path based on my own circumstances was, how do I incorporate these two things? How do I incorporate the wealth with the spirituality? How do I incorporate the health with the wealth and merge these two together? And when I left Wall Street at 39, about 5 years ago, I thought I was going to throw that part of me away. I was like, I don't want to think about that Wall Street guy. He's an animal. He's all he cares about is money. He's crazy. He just stays up all night watching the screens and just tries to kill people on deals and all of that. He's cutthroat. I don't want to think about that guy. And, it's quite funny because when I was at the end of my Wall Street career, I was started to have all of these dreams about drum circles and shamanism and spiritual things and going to the Amazon and all that. And when I left Wall Street, I started having all these Wall Street dreams. I would be, practicing spirituality, studying yoga and stuff like that. And I go to bed at night and I would dream of the stock market. And I came to this realization that both of these parts are parts of me. And to the degree that I kind of repress one of them, it's an unexpressed potential inside of myself. And that ultimately my own path was bringing wealth together with my own spirituality, learning how to make money and use it to create goodness in society and to improve the lives of others and my own family and the earth. And that ultimately merged into my business now called the Abundance Archetype, which I believe is the kind of the trinity of wealth creation, spirituality, and relationships, and many, many other subcategories within that. And that's essentially what I've created. And now I teach that to my students, try to teach them how to be entrepreneurs, how to make money, how to express their own creativity and genius in the world. At the same time, do it by working for a greater boss.
The greatest.
Yeah.
That's beautiful. That's a profound journey that you had. I love that you were dreaming about stocks after going to Peru. And just, generally, I think I really appreciate what you said a lot about the pushing it away. I think that there's this quality in the spiritual path for in the process to kind of reject the older chapters. This is the new me. This is the new, but we're actually all of it the whole time. And especially if you start getting time as illusion, you're all versions of yourself in all moments, etc. So man, deep out to that integration. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, I think we need to transcend and include the previous stage.
Mm-hmm. Is it Wilbur?
Yeah, Wilbur says that in terms of the structure stages of consciousness. But I believe that that's very accurate for me. I had to transcend Wall Street, but at the same time, I need to include it in my everyday life. One example I can give of that just in my own life is when I was very young, I loved two things. It was drumming and magic. And before anyone told me, anything about, how you need to make a living or, before any kind of indoctrination in school or any influences of my dad's Wall Street career, or anything of that, I just picked up a drum and I loved to go to the magic store and was kind of fascinated with those two things. And I still am. And I'm a big drummer and I love magic, kind of a different kind of magic, not so much sleight of hand now, but the magic of manifestation and, some of the, tools that, you and I both use. But the reason I'm bringing this up is because, when I went into Wall Street, I thought I had to drop my magic and I had to drop my drumming. Mm-hmm. But it was only later that what I realized made me a very good trader was that I could feel the beat and the pulse of the market. And that I felt the magic when I made money. It was like pulling a rabbit out of a hat. Like it felt magical to me and it gave me a sense of wonder and awe. And when I left Wall Street, I thought I had to give that part of me up. And I went into sort of like a dark night of the soul of like, who am I now? I'm not this important figure anymore. Nobody calls me. Nobody wants to take me out to dinner. Nobody wants to send me an email. It's just like me driving my kids to school and back and, being kind of by myself, almost like a hermit. And when I got into coaching, I realized that what made me a good coach and a good therapist was that I could help my clients establish a rhythm in their own life. And I can bring back the magic of life, the joy of life, the spontaneity of life back into them. And so all along, I think that we wear these roles of the drummer, the magician, the trader, the dad, the mom, the coach, the teacher, whatever archetype is kind of drawing on you in that moment. But deep down, there's this energetic pulse that goes through our entire life from the moment we're born to the moment we die, and probably before and after. It's probably an infinite wave of an energy. To me, underneath the drummer, there's rhythm. And underneath rhythm, there's like the heartbeat of creation, the heartbeat of the mother. It's the feeling you get when you want to when the bass is kicking and you want to dance and you can't even put words to it. And the feeling you get, that aha moment when something lights you up that is beyond words, it's an energetic frequency of some sort. And that is what has been carrying me in my life throughout all of these roles. So as I changed from, student to trader to coach to teacher, I realized that nothing really changed. The business card changed, but essentially the foundation of which all of that lays on has always been the same. And so what I encourage people to do is to find that in their life and express that in whatever they're doing, whether or not they're working for Meta, whether or not they're doing a podcast or whatever they're doing, to find that pulse that has been with them since the beginning that makes them feel alive and that is their unique expression of themselves.
That's lovely. That's so true. Follow your bliss is kind of what I'm getting from that, the Joe Campbell mantra. What you're most excited about, what you're most alive about, that's you. That's who you are. That's your identity. And don't listen to the world and, the institutions, back to the institution. Don't listen to everyone else that's telling you what to be and what you should be, not what you ought to be. That's so true, and you're living proof that that there's a commonality to those eras and those phases. It's really fascinating, and I hope you write a book about your journey, or maybe you're already working on it. Yeah. We don't have to release that.
I created maybe my version of that right now was my course.
Yeah,
digital book essentially. But you never know. I mean, there's a lot of things possible.
There's a lot of things percolating.
Yeah, there's a lot of things percolating. At this time, I'm trying to be patient. I think patience is something that didn't come easy to me. Patience would have made me a lot better trader. Patience would improve my spiritual quest. And, I think that the funny thing about follow your bliss is that follow your bliss is absolutely right. But the thing that they leave out is the patience. Because follow your bliss and your dreams will manifest, but it's just don't be attached to when that's going to happen. It might not happen, exactly when you want it to happen.
Yeah, Jason, if you could get outside of my skull right now, that'd be really great because you're the voice in my head. I'm curious, you were into magic, but you were in a Wall Street trader. I love also that image of like you got shape and you were making money, but you were still miserable. Like that validates a lot of my spiritual commentary world stuff. And what was it that brought you to the spiritual piece in terms of like, was it a book or a teacher or school?
Well, my first teacher along the path was meeting Paul Check. I don't know if you know Paul. He has a podcast. He has a podcast called Living 4D. And that was around the age of 26 or 27 years old. I had a physical trainer at the time who had studied under him. And it was quite funny, actually, because I thought I was kind of a stud at this time. Here I am, 27 years old. I just lost all this weight. And so we sent him a video of me in the gym working out and doing all these cool things. And he sent back a note to me saying, "You're completely burnt out. You're totally fried. You need to take 2 years off of exercise." And to me, at this point, I was basically had transferred unknowingly my addiction to booze and cannabis and food and excess to working out.
Mm-hmm.
This was like telling an alcoholic they can't drink anymore. And so it was quite a shock. And that sort of cracked open my shell. And I did spend the next 2 years basically pursuing yoga and Tai Chi and Qigong and less, exertive exercises. And that kind of began my inner journey through those practices around that time. And then along the way, I've met tons and tons of teachers in a variety of paths, from shamanism and yoga, meditation, biogeometry, tarot, Qigong, Tai Chi, you name it, I've studied it on this search to really understand these different practices and ultimately understand myself.
Amazing. Yeah. And by the way, I love your content. I love your interviews. You're always referencing and citing both deeply personal stuff and research you've made. And so
I reflect that back to you because I love your stuff. It's got the perfect combination of education and humor. And I honor that.
Oh, thanks, man. Yeah. Well, let's go there for a second. What I wanted to, I'm interested around the workout piece, but what I'll say is what you were sharing about your story reminded me about mine, which is I was a child comedian.
Oh, wow. Yeah,
so I did stand-up comedy in middle school, high school, and I killed. And I was just like, I was thinking about going into it, and it was the jokes are not holding up. They're not going to make it on the pod, but it was me hosting the talent shows and stuff. And anyway, I went to college and met guys that were way funnier than me, like just effortlessly hilarious. I'm good as like a tag team. I can like riff back with people, I think is like my best thing. Hence podcasts. All right. But when I met these guys, I went hardcore into spiritual religious film. Right. And so I made very slow, serious, like PBS style Ken Burns religion docs.
Last Testament of Christ kind of thing.
No jokes anymore. I'm serious now, and I'm proud of them. They're a part of me. And, I think they hold up. They hold up better than the 8th grade comedy routine. But, a few years ago when I started writing this book, it was like, there needs to be some jokes in there. Needs to be some laughs. And there's grades, kind of what I wanted to ask you about was like influences. Like for me, Ram Dass is like so high up there. Alan Watts, people who are fun. Zhuangzi is an ancient Chinese Taoist poet. I know you're into Taoism. Like Zhuangzi is hilarious. And it's like, that Rumi's funny, there's so much lightheartedness and spirituality. So anyway, all those guys influenced me and deep out to them.
I think that's really amazing. And I think what you're kind of showcasing here is exactly my own story as well.
Yeah.
In that, for you had this love of comedy and then you take a hard, left turn or whatever, right turn. I'm not sure which way you went, but you went one way, completely opposite. And you went into the
serious
path. But
yeah,
ultimately, I think now your work is an integration of kind of your primary and your secondary, traits. A lot of times we have, like for you, the comedian was primary, and this unknown part of yourself was probably this deep spiritual, deep religious understanding part. You move into that one, and that becomes primary, and then all of a sudden we repress the comedian part of yourself, and that becomes secondary. Yeah. And ultimately, what we need to do is we need to create the Trinity, and the Trinity is when we can move freely between both of those parts. And I think personally that is the path of mastery, and that mastery is the exact skill that's required to be entrepreneurial successful, to be wealthy. You must master yourself and your trade. At the same time, I believe that mastery or excellence is the exact thing you need to do in the spiritual world, is master and master yourself and continuously improve yourself. So I think that same thing is actually the same quality that exists. In fact, I've done a lot of research into this just in my own head, really, but I've explored that I think the same principles that were required to make myself a very good trader exist in trying to develop my spiritual side as well. I think that there are some core commonalities that exist in both fields, and I believe that mastery is probably the number one. Defining your competitive edge. What is it that makes me tick? What is it that if I could do this for the rest of my life, it wouldn't be work? What is the thing I love to do as a child? What is my unique gift? What are my unique skills and talents? And, that is so important in the business world. We must know what is unique to us, because if we're playing somebody else's game, we're going to be just like them. And we have to really stand out and know what we can do to bring our own uniqueness forward. But the same thing happens in the spiritual path. I think often people throw away the individuality. And while the oneness is very important, the individuality is just as important. We all play a unique role in this grand cosmic puzzle. And so becoming the best version of yourself is just as important in tapping into spirituality as it is to tapping into the higher levels of finance or wealth.
Totally. Yeah. Well said. It's like this idea that the mystics use this kind of language, right, around the dream and the external projection or reflection is just the projection of your own internal consciousness, right? It's like we are creating it. And I realize that you got to be careful with those kinds of statements, because there's a relative reality of a lot of other creators. The mycelium network of the one conscious mind has a lot of iterative qualities beyond a blanket statement like that. But, these components of our lives that seem to be playing out in this kind of narrativistic way are reflections of our own internal kind of victories and stiff arms, to your point earlier. And so I think you're right. And I really like, it's healthy for me to talk to you and hear you, because I am a recovering renunciant model starving artist. I really, I was in documentary. I couldn't make any money, and I kind of I've caught myself like glorifying that period. Oh, I was a starving artist. I think everybody does that. It's like, yeah, I waited tables. I had $12 to my name. Everybody likes to talk about the beauty of the struggle. Anyway, I've the last few years I've been deconditioning that. A lot of what you said earlier around the spiritual figures and their proximity to money and power. That's an interesting conversation, because I warmly I have a counter on Jesus, but I do think that ultimately, what you're saying and what the mystics and all these great teachers say is that money and financial success in the world is neutral. The person is what colors whether or not it's positive or negative. And I think, essentially what you're trying to do is avoid idolatry. You just don't want to worship that. And that's what greed is. Greed is just another word for idol worship of money and power and being hypnotized by it, what it can do. But, Yogananda, for example, has a great book called Laws of Success, which is about using it sounds like a lot of what you talk about. It's like using that soul-defined alignment with Creator to serve the children of Creator. You can do that by aligning yourself with abundance and success. You're in a bigger position to help other people, and that's what you should do. Yeah.
You brought up Rumi, and I'm reminded of this Rumi poem, and I'm going to butcher it, I'm sure, because, well, first of all, we're already translating it into English from Farsi. It already kills it. I have a good friend who goes by the name of Yahuma, and he and I read a lot of Rumi poetry together, and he speaks Farsi. And when we look at the English translations, and the same thing happens when I try to understand Sanskrit, the English language, as beautiful as it is for its widespread use, doesn't do a good job about describing states of consciousness, altered states, psychological development, spiritual path. In yoga, there's something like 100 words for love in Sanskrit, for that matter. The same in Tibetan Buddhism. We say, I love pizza, I love my car, I love my girlfriend, I love my kids, right? But there's all of these different kinds of descriptors of love, like the love of a parent to a child, the love of an intimate lover, the love of a best friend, the love of an animal, the love of God. And so, and many, many, many more. But like all of these have, in other languages, have descriptive words to describe those states and experiences. And we just say love, love, love. But Rumi
MLK was onto that with agape,
Agape,
to
yeah.
your point. But it's not widespread. He couldn't crack the zeitgeist with that one.
Yeah, and in that too, there's only really two words.
Right.
Agape and eros.
We have room to grow.
We do. We have room
in the characteristics.
We have
room
room
the
to grow.
English dialects.
I want to honor the English language for its ability for all of us, many people around the world, to communicate. But at the same time, we have to understand its limits, and we have to understand that when we translate texts from Aramaic, from Hebrew, from Sanskrit, from Chinese, from Farsi into English, that we may be missing a large part of the picture, especially don't have the context in which it was said or the time in which it was written, but also we may not have words that are synonymous for the words that are being expressed. I used to live next to a Korean Buddhist temple, and I became very good friends with the Buddhist monks there. I spent a lot of time with them, and they would call themselves reverends. And one day I just decided, I said, well, what is the word in Korean? And they told me the word, which I don't remember, it's a Korean word. And I said, well, how would you describe that in English, if you could describe that? And they said, well, the best that we could do is practitioner of the way. And I was like, wow, that is completely different in my head than the word reverend. The word reverend evokes a specific context for me, of the church or of something like that, where practitioner of the way is a completely different thing. So anyway, Rumi talks about, he sees this prince riding on a horse in all of these gowns, riding towards him. And the prince has this radiant glow. And Rumi turns to God and is like, praise God, for he could even test his servants with affluence. And so this whole thing about money is that with more money comes greater responsibility and a greater karmic impact. It's like putting more weight on the bar. The more money and power and privileges we have, the more responsibility we have to do the right thing with it, to circulate it in society in a positive way, to create products that improve life, to help other people in a positive way. And, from a spiritual perspective, there's more chips on the table, the more money you have. But money itself is currency. It's current, it's energy and information, and it's flow. And it could do amazing things, or it could do very negative things. The same thing we could say of artificial intelligence, for example. It could create many amazing solutions, and it could kind of also create bombs, I'm sure, and other things like that. So, these things are inherently neutral, and it's up to us to inform them, to use our own consciousness to decide how we're going to use these various tools.
Absolutely. Well said. It does have a vibratory quality of there's more at stake, right? There's more on the line, because, and maybe that's why, it makes me think about celebrity and, kind of the great falls of the rich and powerful, it's because they weren't able to embody that higher vibration, and it all kind of came crumbling down,
I think it is a big test. And so I think I have a lot of empathy for those that have had money that have not used it responsibly. I'm sure at times I've done the same thing, especially in my younger years. But I think that it offers us a great opportunity for a lot of spiritual development or a lot of karmic debt, one could say.
Totally.
So I think it's something that you can pass through, but it requires a lot of inner work in order to do it and to manage it.
What are some ways that you use it in a place of service? I know you talked about your community and, essentially emboldening other career people and entrepreneurs.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's
your main one.
That's a main one is aligning your work with something that improves life, that helps support other people. But there are other forms of money. For example, picking up trash. Picking up trash is one of the most important things that I do. And this is coming from somebody. I used to walk down the street and I used to look at trash and I would be like, that's not my problem.
Ooh.
Somebody else is going to pick that up. You're walking around New York City or you're walking around your hometown, you see a bag of chips on the ground. And I used to walk right by it. And in kind of like in a spiritual awakening approach, I've realized that one of the greatest things that I can do, which is so simple that anyone can do, is I can pick up trash, especially trash that's not mine. And to me, that's one of the greatest energetic services that I can do.
Very symbolic.
Being kind to people, smiling, saying thank you, forgiveness, gratitude, investing in companies and investing in solutions that improve the earth and improve the quality of life of other people. Being a teacher, for example. So, I'm just doing my best personally, and I'm on this path too. I think like this whole idea of the abundance archetype that I created and I'm teaching is also my own personal discovery of this, of really what does that mean in my own life. My biggest thing was aligning my job and aligning my professional life as an act of service to help awaken people up to a greater version of themselves. Outside of that, it's kind of the things I said, but for somebody.
Also, you have 4 wonderful children.
I have 4 kids too, and that's and an amazing wife, and putting time in there is definitely another form of money. So I think like it doesn't have to be that you have a lot of money in order to make a big impact, right? Aligning yourself a little bit each day to do the job that you love to do, and when you're happy, that is a positive impact on the world. When you pick up trash, when you are mindful of your thoughts, mindful of your words, mindful of your actions, when you are kind to people, when you have gratitude for people, when you can forgive people, these are all things we all can do. And I think that's, very simple ways that you can improve the quality of your life and use your energy, use your currency in a positive way. I think people ask, I'll just say this. People ask me all the time, my students are like, you've studied yoga, you've studied Sanskrit. What's the best mantra? What's the best mantra that you can use? Like, what should I do? And I learned this from my dear friend and teacher, Yahuma. And he says, the best mantra you can say is thank you.
Mm.
And so it doesn't have to be that difficult to be spiritual. It's having an optimistic viewpoint.
I think that's Mr. Eckhart too, by the way.
Says thank you.
The only prayer you need
is thank you. Yeah. So I mean, it's very, very true. Saying thank you, saying I'm grateful. I'm grateful to be alive today. I'm grateful for this earth. I'm grateful for air, water, food, my family, my friends, my body, and I forgive you. That's I think 90% of it right there. I don't think we need to be so esoteric about these things. And in a lot of ways, it becomes almost, one could say Luciferic, moving too up into the kind of mental and academic and psychedelic forms of these things when boots on the ground is really some simple things. Pick up trash, take care of your body, clean your mind, be kind, be grateful, have forgiveness first for yourself, for your past mistakes, so you can be present in this moment. Forgive other people, realizing that, all of that was important to make you who you are today.
I purposefully left that question fairly open-ended in the framing of it, and I'm really glad I did, because that allowed you to answer it in a very beautiful, a profound, philosophical, larger zoom out question. The other framework was kind of more on money projects, which you did allude to, like investing in companies that help out. I think, your main company, or your main community rather, in terms of helping others. Shout out, I have some friends that run Garbage Humans of ATX.
Oh yeah?
Which is the best name for a volunteer group. They're on Instagram. Garbage Humans of ATX. Yeah, Kelly Stewart is the homie, and she's they go out and pick up trash, and that's all they do. And they bag it all up, and they clean up the parks. It's amazing.
I'm new to the trash game, but I'll tell you, man, I love it. And
you should start Garbage Humans of your city.
I might have to.
I might have to do it.
The funny part is that, like, I laugh about it because I live here in the middle of like almost 3,000 acres of just forest, and so sometimes I have to walk for hours to find a piece of trash. But when I do, I'm so excited to find it because, even on a practical sense, I've noticed that the more trash I pick up, the more support the universe brings me. It's like, I feel like it's like our duty to keep the earth. Stewardship. I feel like stewardship is important, but like I honestly can say that I've felt the personal generosity of the universe, of the intelligence that's guiding the universe in supporting me more in my life with more abundance, the more I do those things. Essentially, I take a lot of classes with Dr. Ibrahim Karim from biogeometry. And he says that anytime that you protect Earth, he can qualify scientifically with his various pendulums that it generates a field of a spiritual quality, because the Earth itself is holding that intelligence. And so anytime that you are doing an act of protection of Earth, what's happening is you are aligning yourself with the laws of nature, with the laws of karma, with the laws of dharma. And then you yourself then become this walking beacon of these natural laws. And the natural law of the universe is abundance. And so then you become abundance yourself and start attracting that back to you. So it's even like, it was mind-boggling to me, all the different ways that these simple acts actually become verified by these different fields of, this is not just like a value system of something that, I think I need to do because if not, I'm going to be judged, or because somebody told me to do it. It's because I actually see the benefit in my own life each day.
Yeah, I think that's definitely very real. And, it's almost like every choice, every moment, every decision is like this crossroads, almost, is kind of the way I'm envisioning it. When you have the illustration of like, it creates a biofield, or something, it's almost like, just every interaction. That's kind of like NDE land a little bit too. A lot of the near-death experiences talk about life reviews, and like, people are like, I was just a carpenter. I, didn't do anything. And the life reviews are like, no, remember that moment when that person really needed that one thing that you're the only person that was there for them. And that was very impactful. It's like, there's this karmic scorecard. I mean, that sounds too analytical, but it's a little stock trader diagrammy, but
I believe it to be true.
I think that's probably true. Yeah.
I believe it to be true. I personally think that everything in our life is a symbolic representation. Mm-hmm. God, in order to thinking doesn't require a subject-object split. Thinking does create a subject-object split. Like, in order for me to think, I have to be aware of my own thoughts, or for us to have this conversation right now, there's a you and there's a me. So there's a subject and an object, or a subject for you and an object for me. But we are one with the Creator, one with the universe. So in order for us to be here, we can't be God's thought because that creates a separation. So we must be God's dream. And so if we are God's dream, then our lives are dreamlike, which so many mystics and philosophers have said. But then why would our life not then be interpreted in a dreamlike way? Like I study process-oriented psychology, which is a kind of a shamanic split off of Jungian psychology. And we do a lot of dream interpretation. So we're
process-orient?
Yeah, process work psychology or process-oriented psychology, founded by Dr. Arnold Mandel, who passed away in the last year. The point is that I do a lot of work on studying my dreams. But it occurred to me that our day dreams, our life is a dream. And therefore, it's a waking dream. And therefore, everything in our life could be interpreted like every aspect of a dream. And one of the first rules of dream interpretation when you study your night dreams is that everything in your dream is a part of you, usually parts that are secondary that are there trying to wake you up. If you have a monster in your dream, you can ask yourself, where am I being monster-like? What am I running away from monster-like? Or where do I need a little bit more of that monster energy in a positive way, so to speak? There's a lot of different kind of ways to look at it through like a fractal lens. But in the same way, if that is true, and if our lives are dreams, then everything in our life, everything that catches our attention, every person we pass, every song that pops into our head, every movie that clip or line, every joke that happens, every encounter, right? Every body sensation, every sickness, everything that happens to us is a part of ourselves in a dreamlike way. And we can look at it through the lens of symbolism about what is that trying to say to us. And for me, I recognize that every single thing in my life is not only a projection and a reflection of myself, but is there to help me wake up to the greater version of myself. And so that understanding in and of itself has brought so much magic to my life, because life then converts from being random acts. Everything is just random. This whole beautiful universe that we live in with all of its magnificence is just completely random, to everything that is happening is part of an intelligent dream there to support me. My body symptom is there to awaken me to something. The song that pops into my head isn't just an annoying thing that I need to get rid of. It's there to give me a lyric, to give me a quality, a sensation, or a memory, to bring me into a state of being that improves my life. And so that to me has made so much richness. And I think a lot of people suffer from flatland because they're not connected to the dreamlike nature of their own life.
Very well articulated. Thank you for stating that so clearly and beautifully. I'm a longtime practitioner of A Course in Miracles, and there's a section in my book where I compare ACIM to the Advaita masters. Yeah. Which I personally have not seen a ton of information on, but it's like, where's the book? Listeners, write it or I will. But, it's like Sri Ramana says verbatim lines from A Course in Miracles, who says verbatim lines from Dogen. It's like the most psychedelic non-dual masters and the most psychedelic non-dual texts have this same idea. And there's this cohesive ideology, Jason, which is exactly what you just said, which is that, they asked Sri Ramana, they asked him, how are we to treat other people? And he said, there are no others.
Yeah.
Right. And so, there's this level of like just insane, immense embodiment in that level of consciousness that you're talking about that is just so liberating.
Can I share something on this?
Of course.
Advaita thing? What I found interesting is like, I think we have the tendency to get pulled into one lineage. Like, I am a Buddhist. I'm a Hindu. I'm an Advaita. I'm non-dual. I'm dual. I'm this, I'm that, right? And so, what I think is an important thing to share that I learned is that all of these different teachers, and they're all amazing enlightened beings, came at a particular time in history that we must remember. We can't look at the thousands of year old Bible and look at it necessarily in the same context as we would today. There are things, there are parallels that are obviously myths that stand the test of time, parables and various teachings, but the context of which there are in.
The moment created it.
Yeah, and so we have to kind of say, how do we update this for our moment in time? The same thing happens with these yogic lineages. So the way I understand it is that, really one of the first yogis that came along was the Buddha. And the Buddha was at a time when the continuity of the Vedic tradition, the Brahmin caste, was sort of corrupt, right? Kind of like Jesus walking into the temple and seeing all the rabbis with all the money on the table and whatever.
It's infuriatingly similar.
Yeah. And so what he went to is he responded appropriately to saying, it's all emptiness. None of this is real. Right?
Right.
And that was appropriate because he needed to break this kind of concept of people being all about the material side of things. So he went to saying it's all emptiness. All this money, all this riches, all this materiality, that's not real. You can't take that with you. Then comes along Shankara, I believe, in terms of the path. And he basically was going to, it's all Brahman. It's all oneness. It's all the light, right? He took it from the Buddha, emptiness, zero, to it's all oneness. And, no kind of concept of individuality or relationship, but it's all one. And there's no material distinctions in Brahman. It's all one. But that was important because of doing the correction or the evolution of Buddha's time. Then comes along Ramanuja, who had this Vasita Advaita. I might not be pronouncing that right, but kind of qualified is that, it's sort of a yes and it's oneness, but there are distinctions. Then comes Madhva Acharya, who brought in this, who was like a strong, like wrestler, kind of like physical guy, warrior type, brought in Dvaita. That's like, he had this thing, he used to go like this, like distinctions are real. Individuality is important. We are distinctive individuals. And he was correcting or evolving the previous. And this goes on till Chaitanya's time, when Chaitanya kind of said like, yes and. It's inconceivably one, none, and individual. And I think that's a really important point, is that, we often get lost in all of these different distinctions or these different lineages, and they all hold an important piece of the puzzle. And they're all essentially saying the same thing. And if each one of these teachers could give the full teaching of their time, they probably would all understand all of what the other ones taught. But that teachers and religions and come at various times in history to give various pieces of the puzzle. And what we really need to do is put them all together, in my opinion, and not get stuck that Shankara was right, or Ramanuja was right, or Madhva was right, or Chaitanya was right, or Buddha was right, or Yogananda was right, or anybody was right. But they all were responding to a historical context and bringing forth a piece of the beauty, and we need to bring them all together. I mean, the Abrahamic, sorry, I know I'm talking for a while, but the Abrahamic religions, forget, unfortunately, that they all come from Abraham.
There's 1,000 variations of each one of those too.
Yeah, and they're all coming. It's all coming from one. But at the same time, don't throw out the individual. Don't throw out those lineages. They're all beautiful and important, but they all go up the chain to one being and to one start.
this is basically all I think about and talk about, Jason. So you just tapped into my favorite topic, which is interfaith connectivity and the spiritual buffet line. Sometimes I use that term for my work in my book. That, like,
Smorgasbord.
yeah, like I've described my book as a billboard for the spiritual buffet line. It's like Christians, or whatever. The joke is, we got hamburger people. But all I'm doing is going, no, we got mac and cheese, we got salads, we got dessert. Hamburgers are fine.
Lots of toppings too.
Right. You could put avocados on there, some jalapenos. Yeah. So
I honor your book,
what
man.
my work is. Oh, thank you, man.
I really do. You had a beautiful mix of kind of mystical Christianity, which I know seemed like it was more of your kind of original inspiration, but then moving into all different kinds of studies of the great Eastern masters. And you also brought in a lot of Native American teachings with your own encounters with your father's friend. I forgot his name, but
Richard. Yeah, thank you. The late great. No, you're right that the what you called out, which is the connection between Buddha and Jesus, is a core development for me in the early years around exactly what you said. Like, there's a line in the Buddha's life where the Vedic rituals, they were very into like fire. There's a lot of fire ceremonies. They still do homas. Yeah, they still do them. But there was just this overemphasis on the calculation of the ritual stuff. And Buddha says something like, the fire is anger. The fire is lust. This fire doesn't matter, that corrective quality that you talked about. It's really great.
What's the fire pointing to is the key, I think.
Yeah, like ceremonies are great because they establish an environment for contemplation, communion, and so on. But at the same time, if you're too interested in that and not interested in your own internal reflections and contemplations and growth and so on, you're bypassing the power of it.
I think the interesting thing about ceremonies is, like, I love ceremonies, I really do, and I think though that one of the problems of ceremonies, whether or not it's psychedelic or any kind of ceremony, is how is it improving the quality of your life, especially 3 weeks after the ceremony? Are you integrating any of this?
No, I'm just going to the next one next week, man.
Yeah. And, that comes in all forms, therapist, running from therapist to therapist, or retreat to retreat, or ayahuasca center to ayahuasca center, or teacher to teacher, job to job, wife to wife, the whole thing. Ultimately, I think what we need to realize is that the purpose of ceremony is to teach us that our life is a ceremony, to live our life ceremonially, that we live in a container of ceremony, that when we wake up and we touch our feet on the ground, that's a ceremony. When we make our coffee, that's a ceremony. When we see our children, that's a ceremony. When we walk in nature, that's a ceremony. When we go to work, that's a ceremony. It's all ceremony. Ceremony is not something that only happens a couple times a year. It happens every moment of every day. And, I do think that having these standout kind of important, bigger ceremonies are important too. But if you can't integrate them in your life, you're just wasting your time, wasting money, wasting medicine. And so it's all about how are you living with this new knowledge every single day. I don't care if you do ceremony, if you come home and, you can't get along with your partner.
You are breaking the veil, Jason. Your
you.
entire life is a ceremony. That's very, very beautiful and true, and a great reminder for me and anyone listening. I had a couple more things I wanted to talk about to your earlier piece, which is one is essentially what you're saying around the teachings and the lineages and so on, which is reverence for all and also not superiority and so on. And I really agree with that. And I think that the issue itself is actually the nature of form, the nature of concepts or conceptual thinking, and in not being able to hold it. It was said that Sri Ramana's primary teaching was silence.
Yeah.
And the joke is he would talk to anyone who missed the primary teaching.
Well, that's why the great mystics use music.
Yeah.
They use poetry. They use art, dance, because the truth of spirituality, the things that we're trying to talk about now and dance around, cannot even be spoken about. They can only be expressed, symbolically, through experience, creatively. The way you feel when you feel real soul music of any religion, of any culture. I listen to Persian music, Jewish music, Christian music. I listen to all sorts of music, shamanic music. And when I hear soul music, I don't care what language it's in. It evokes something in me that is beyond words. I know what they're saying, even though I don't even know what they're saying in the translation, right?
I agree with you. And I'm getting to this point where I feel like I can tell in some way, without being too music critic, right? But I do feel like I can tell if somebody is the intentionality from which the work comes from, right? If it is that soulful song or musical expression and so on, or if it's done from a more focus on like a technical or worse, like a marketing, almost
Totally.
like
You can feel the depth.
Right.
You can feel the lived experience, the ups
Exactly.
and downs, the crying, the suffering, the pain, the joy, the love, the hurt. You feel it in your heart. There's something that happens when you look at a painting that is the culmination of someone's life that's different than an AI generated image. There's something that happens when you see live music and someone's pouring their heart out that's different than an AI generated, dance track or something like that. By the way, I think those things are really amazing and they like blow my mind how incredible technology is, but it doesn't evoke my soul. And I think that's a really important thing to remember. In Sanskrit, there's a word called achintya, and achintya means inconceivable. Inconceivable. Inconceivable to the manas. The manas are like our mind, but it's more than mind. It's like our thinking ability, our memory, our willpower, our feeling capacity. It's like we can't grasp it. It's like to try to understand karma, for example. Think about the ChatGPT algorithm in the mind of the universe that's calculating every single piece of trash that we, and all the things that we do, every word that we say, every thought that we have for the entire universe and multiverse, right? It's the largest supercomputer imaginable. You can't even fathom that. Lifetime to lifetime, this thing is keeping track. To try to talk about God is inconceivable. We can't even really talk about love. We can't quantify love. But when you feel it, when you feel that connection, right? And so
describe an orange. Right.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah. So, there's something that happens that is only felt through direct experience, the direct experience of ecstatic dance, the direct experience of lovemaking, the direct experience of lovemaking with a partner is something that can never be experienced through watching pornography. The direct experience of reading or writing poetry or listening to music or making music or chanting mantras, for example, these things take us beyond the mind, beyond the book knowledge, and get us really to the direct experience with the source of what we're looking for, which to me is the experience of beauty and excellence.
Extremely well said. And, one of the things that you're reminding me of is I've been going to the ballet.
Cool.
At the end of the year, we go to the Nutcracker.
Nice.
And I was the last person that I thought would go or want to go. But the gang I went with had a affinity for both dance and music, and I was like, okay. I did enjoy a moderate, reasonable dose of psilocybin. and timed it perfectly. And I'm sitting there, and it was so, it evoked what you're talking about, in that it was a transferred level of communication that I was not anticipating. And what happened for me was, I consider myself a writer, filmmaker, but just kind of, that's my craft. And I got a million ideas. I mean, I probably got 20 different ideas for things to write about and work on project wise. And it almost got overwhelming to where I was like, I wish I would have brought a pad so I could be sitting here journaling while this is going on, because it was one of those where you can't take your phone out. Like, it was like, it would disturb the entire thing. So, and then it hit me. I was like, oh, I can just go to the bathroom. So I went to the bathroom and just downloaded, all these creative ideas that the ballet and the environment of, like, to your point, like real transmission of a creative practice can do. So deep bow there. The other thing I was going to say, this is from earlier when you were talking, was I really like that idea, how you framed it around kind of evolving theology or evolving spirituality, and they all have their place and they all have value. And I think that one reason is because it's that's a great argument against prescribing a fixed thing to someone, because that's going to be inherently flawed, in very likely not matching their consciousness signature and so on. What the image I wrote down was the other shore. When the boat reaches the shore, you leave the boat, right? And that's a Buddhist image, right? And so, I just, more there. I think a lot of people, I'm sure, that come into your work as well. I get a decent amount of people asking for book recs and teachers and paths and so on. And there's the part of me is like, oh, this is a good list of books, and my book has a bunch of references, and but there's this other part of me that's like, there's no book, there's no teacher. You have to connect with yourself. So what do you say to that?
I think it's a little bit of a paradox.
Mm-hmm.
It reminds me of this quote. I think Shankara said it, maybe Rumi, I don't know, but it was, it's basically saying, you need to be enlightened in order to understand Scripture. Mm-hmm. And once you're enlightened, you no longer need Scripture. Right. So
the classic Zen koan, mystic paradox.
I think all of these books and all of these teachers are so important. I mean, you mentioned a lot of great people earlier, and they all have had huge influence on my life. I once had a 10-minute FaceTime that came into my life with Ram Dass. And that 10 minutes of speaking to him, and he was very late stage, he was post-stroke and he could barely speak. That had a huge influence on me. And I still go back and watch that video, even though like there wasn't much said, but there was some short transmission. And of course, I've listened to all of his audiobooks and all of those great teachers of Osho, Alan Watts, and, thousands of hours of studying things along the way. But, ultimately you come to a point where the direct experience is actually more important. And, there aren't that many books that can help you. But at the beginning, it's very important to create a framework. And along the way, you have to do a little bit of Bruce Lee, where you listen to everybody, you take in what's useful, you reject what's not, and you make it your own.
Right. Exactly.
And so I think it's a yes and, like everything in life. To understand spirituality, you have to be able to understand paradoxes, and so I think the books are like that teachers are very useful. There's only a few people I've met in my own life, actually probably only one, that was somebody who really had no teachers, who just through direct experience, like the great masters that
they exist. There's a couple of them.
They exist. Yeah. I know one,
but they're rare.
Most
I'm not one of them.
Most people like myself have studied with hundreds of teachers, and I'm grateful to all of them. And the art is knowing what you can learn from them, why you're with them, when you've transcended them, and how to include them and be respectful to them as you move on. And, realizing that there are many teachers along the way that teach us through the negative path as well. And that we can be grateful to those people because they show us what not to do, or they test us in various ways. And even they are incredible teachers. Osho was a great one of those, who did a lot of interesting, positive things and a lot of absolutely insane things that are a really great, example of what to do and what certainly not to do along the way. And I have many of those in my own life as well. And so, everybody can be your teacher. Your grandmother is your teacher. Your kids are a fantastic teacher. Your partner better be your teacher. And then there are incredible spiritual teachers that you can meet along the way that will show up at the right time. And, I take that teacher-student relationship as sacred. And we all have to recognize that there is a point along our own path where we have to move into the teacher role while also remaining an eternal student as well. But I think that the ultimate path is moving into a position where you have a direct relationship with spirit itself. All of these great mystics that we're reading about all did that. They sat there under a tree and they talked to God and they downloaded this incredible knowledge. All of the great shamans in South America, there was no book on how to make ayahuasca. They talked to the plants and they downloaded all this various information. And so it's certainly possible, but we've gotten kind of far away from the belief that we can do that kind of thing. And I think we need to move back in that direction. But along the way, a helpful book or 100, a helpful teacher or 10, all of these things, depending on one's individual path in their own pursuit, can be useful, but ultimately recognizing that they need to move towards a position of empowerment to have this direct relationship with the universe, with God, with the Holy Spirit, with Great Spirit, with their own soul, with their own heart themselves.
It's almost like you're reframing information itself, right? It's like, it's not in a PDF that you download from the Instagram link. It's like, it's not, the internet is great. It has a bunch of stuff. There's every book ever written, there's this part of me that's like, why am I putting a book out? Like, there's enough books out, but it's like, the other part is to say, like, my book isn't out yet, the one I'm writing. Like, it's like, you still can contribute to that voice despite the information overload, because if one person reads it, or actually, I think probably what you would say is what it does for me in that process of how I grow through that, the building of it itself and all the above. But, I think to your point, it's like there needs to be this shift in appreciation for intuitive information.
Yeah.
Beyond rational mind information, and kind of harmonizing those two is what you have to do. We don't neglect the rational, but we have neglected the intuitive, and it's time to harmonize this.
I'm sure you've heard this before, but we have the internet and we have the internet.
Yes, that's good.
And we have cell phones with wireless capability, and we have cells inside of our own body that have the same Wi-Fi. And
cellular communication.
Yeah.
right.
We have our own cellular communication. And we can have speed dials and favorites on our phone and shortcuts, and we can create those in our own life to the information field or to some kind of archetype or angel or whatever we're working with, or with the Holy Spirit itself, and develop those skills through practice and through awakening to the possibility that it's true. And I think in this day and age, we have to bring the two together. We have to embrace AI and we have to embrace our own intuition. And I think, I believe that in order for us to be successful as human beings in the future, it's actually very, very important that we develop our intuition, our imagination, our creativity, for many reasons that, would take too long to kind of go into here, because we're kind of, seems like we're reaching kind of a nice conclusion. But, in order for us to develop our competitive edge, we have to understand what is our competitive edge of being human. How do we differentiate from machines? How do we differentiate from computers or AI? And the things that we have a heart, we have a soul, we have intuition, and we have a body. And the more that we can lean into understanding and listening to our own body, developing our own heart and connecting into the heart field of infinite intelligence, using the wisdom and guidance of our own intuition and our ability to have a direct connect to source, and developing our own imagination and our own creativity, we can work and merge beautifully with technology and bring forth a greater earth that we know is possible, but I'm not sure that we all see it yet, but that I believe is on the verge of awakening to us.
Well, your sincere optimism is tangible to me, and I appreciate it. And I think that it's because it comes from decades of doing the work and integrating, and you have read a lot of books. That's no doubt about it. We're both spiritual book nerds.
Yeah.
But I really honor the place that it comes from in terms of it being a much fuller perspective from you. And I appreciate your optimism. The fun Ram Dass motif through all this is he was asked about the age of Aquarius. Is it the age of Aquarius of the apocalypse? Have you seen that clip?
No.
And he says, I'm not really concerned about kind of the prophecy world in spirituality. He goes, if this is Armageddon, the end of the world, I have to do three things: open my heart, quiet my mind, and relieve suffering. If it's the new age of Aquarius and enlightenment, I have to do three things.
Yeah, it's true.
And
chop wood and carry water, right?
Right.
No, I want to just say one final thing, if that's okay.
Please.
That kind of wraps up our ceremonial talk with the optimism. One thing I learned is that in psychedelic sacred ceremonies, and I'm not talking about the recreational kind, but even though those are sacred in their own way, but I'm talking about like a real shamanic ceremony.
Yeah,
it's very important to be mindful of what you say. That your thoughts and your words carry very immense power of manifestation. So if you bring in those states, when these portals are open and when the energy is open, you bring in negativity, you will manifest negativity. And if you bring in positivity, you will manifest positivity. Like attracts like. Positive thoughts make me feel better. Positive thoughts give me a better energy. Positive thoughts give me more optimism, make me more hopeful, make me happier and brighter and more friendly and loving. And that brings in itself more of what I want. And so, my understanding is this conversation right now is a ceremony. And so in this ceremony, my job is to bring in optimism and to make that manifest. And so, I could sit here and talk about all of the crap going on in the world and complain about any number of things. But then what good am I? I need to clean up the trash. And so I need to bring in that positivity. I need to sit in this ceremony with you and do my best to usher in a brighter future by being positive myself, and then hopefully inspiring others to do the same.
You are a magician casting spells all day.
I told you I looked magic.
Never left it.
Yeah.
Never left it. No, I appreciate that. And I feel like the way that kind of called to you, like maybe there's somebody going to a ceremony soon that that is going to be really good for it. Maybe it's me, who knows? But anyway,
it's divine thoughts, divine words, divine actions. In some ways, manifest like actions are somewhat easier in a weird way. It's easy to kind of pick up a trash. It's a little bit harder to say positive words, and it's very hard to manage our mind. But the reality is, if you reverse it, recognize that thoughts will come to your head all day long. We all know by many spiritual teachers we're not our thoughts, right? our thoughts are happening. And, a simple thing is we're there, like, aware of them. We're watching them, and they're coming and they're going. And a negative thought is really not up to us. What's up to us is, are we putting intensity to it? Are we stewing in it? We're like, yeah, I'm going to get that person or this or that, or I'm so mad. A negative thought can come up, but then we can push it aside, or we can sit there and amplify it. And that's up to us. And then what we do with that thought, the next level of intensity is bringing it to our word. And then the next level is our action. And so be mindful of what you're amplifying in your own mind, be mindful of what you're speaking, and be mindful of your actions. And if we all do that, man, we'll be so blessed. We are already blessed, but we'll be even more blessed.
We'll be contributing more powerfully, no question about it. Jason, thank you so much, man. It's been really beautiful, and deep out to you and your work. And the Abundance Archetype is your course, and highly recommend your work, and your material. What you teach is the real deal. So thank you, my brother. Come back and see us.
Bob, I love you so much, man. I really enjoyed this time. I honor our friendship and your work, your book, your family. So thank you so much.
Hey, love you, brother. Thank you, man. I appreciate it. We'll be in touch.
All right, dude.
Salud.